Good morning on this Sunday, January 31st, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Governor Kemp updates us on the vaccine rollout in Georgia as some groups urge him to get teachers vaccinated now. The push to tighten absentee voting rules in Georgia moves ahead at the Georgia legislature, and Atlanta City Council President Felicia Moore announces her campaign for mayor. Phil, Theron, Kathy, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp responded this week to the pressure he's getting from some education leaders. They want him to move teachers up on the distribution list for the COVID-19 vaccination.
I know for myself, I wouldn't want to put myself ahead of a first responder, a nurse, or a doctor or medical professional that is literally on the front lines of COVID-19. And I wouldn't want to put them in front of someone like my mom or Marty's mom, that if they get this, it can be a death sentence to them.
Governor Brian Kemp calls the recent requests for teachers to get moved up on the list for COVID-19 vaccinations pandemic politics. This comes after some Georgia superintendents and school board members signed on to a letter urging the governor to add educators to the current distribution group.
We just don't have the availability of vaccine. I mean, I'm going off the recommendations that Dr. Toomey and others, health experts have put out there. We know that people over 65 years of age are more susceptible to having a bad outcome in this virus, or even the worst case, and that's death.
There is a little bit of good news this week. The Biden administration says it will send another 25,000 doses per week to Georgia. Kathy, I want to start with you this week. 25,000 more doses doesn't sound like a lot in a state with a population of 10 million, but every little bit helps. Are the governor's hands tied when it comes to teachers? I mean, if there aren't enough doses, how can he move them up on the list?
I think they are tied right at the moment, but I think that if we can start executing getting these vaccines out and distributed more rapidly than we're currently doing, I think we can get there pretty quickly. I do understand teachers and parents' concern about this, and I think he would do well to take a close look at it, but right now we've got to get some better efficiencies in how we're even distributing them to the people that are at the top of the list.
Phil, what do you think about the state punishing the medical center of Alberton because they started to vaccinate educators, and now the center can't get any more vaccines until July?
I was surprised about that, and I think the Elbert County folks, broke the protocols, and I do agree with the governor and what's happening with regard to the distribution. I agree with Kathy. There's not as much that's going around, so you have to conserve it and you have to do priorities. So I think that people over 65 and the first responders should be still at the top of the list until we get more vaccine. I think it might be a little harsh with regard to Elbert County to have them way into the summer not have vaccine. They might want to review that as we get more vaccine.
It is my understanding it was one medical center in Alberton, so I think there are some other places where you could get the vaccine. But
Theron, so the county was served. Okay.
Yeah, Theron, I want to ask you: was this a messaging problem on the part of the governors?
Well, listen, we know that the governor cares very deeply about teachers. I mean, he campaigned on giving teachers pay raises. He's actually almost fulfilled that complete promise. It was a top priority in the first 2 years of his administration during the legislature, and it's going to be another top priority. I just think that the messaging, Lori, could have been a little bit better because, again, we know the governor cares about everyone, and particularly teachers. And I totally understand what he's saying about not getting the vaccine shot, getting in front of the 65 and older people. But I think he could have said something a little differently in the statement. I think he could have said something along the lines of, hey, we're going to do everything we can when we have the doses of vaccines to make sure that we prioritize teachers, because we do understand that they're kind of on the front line, right? Because they are being asked to go back into the classroom when many school districts are going back to in-person learning. And so I think that was just something that I think kind of people were kind of kind of mixed on as far as the reaction, but they do have the right to ask for these teachers who are, it's in a sort of the way you look at it, is a 1A essential worker, because they're being asked to go back into the classroom. And so we'll see how this all plays out.
Janelle, the Georgia House put more money in the governor's budget for public health, adding in more personnel and $18 million to modernize an aging computer system that tracks vaccinations. And we know that this has been a major problem. The governor pointed out public health is getting a lot of money from the feds, but do you think the state should step up as well?
So this is interesting. You know, I feel like in order to have a balanced budget, you have to consider all the streams of income. And if they are getting a lot of money from the federal government, then I feel that the state should possibly, you know, provide a lesser amount, and that way they can dedicate more funds to other areas that would need it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at all the multiple streams of income in order to decide what would actually create a balanced budget. You know, going into this year, we know we're coming off of the pandemic, which is definitely causes us to prioritize public health, obviously a little more than maybe beforehand. But I do think we need to look at all streams of income in order to create a good budget.
You know, and on this issue of COVID-19, this week, State Representative David Clark was escorted out of the chamber because he refused the required COVID testing.
So really, you know, we don't even have a voice down here really much, except to speak out with our voices. I've seen it down here, especially with the Speaker of the House, how he operates. And no, I think the people are going to be behind me because they deserve 2 tests a week if we get 2 tests a week.
Phil, it's my understanding he came back on Thursday after bringing in the results of a test he took and then taking another one at the Capitol. There are a lot of folks in high-risk categories that work at the Capitol. I think about the Sergeant-at-Arms, the secretaries, even many legislators themselves. Do you understand the refusal here?
I don't understand what his message was trying to be. I think that he probably should have followed the protocols, because you make a very good point. And I've been down there a lot of times over the years during my career, and I think every one of us on the panel has. And I called it an incubator of disease anyway. And so I think that I'm glad he did get tested. And I think that he's going to have to explain to his constituents. I was surprised that the Speaker said he couldn't even use his office, and that you need an office to help your constituents, let alone, you know, look at legislation and be an effective legislator. So I guess it all's well that ends well, but he didn't explain himself at all.
Yeah, Kathy, I mean, how do you represent your constituents when you're not even allowed in the chamber?
Well, you don't, or well, you do, but it's pretty ineffective because you're not going to be allowed to vote. And my hats are off for the Speaker. You know, it's a difficult decision to make, but they all agreed that these were going to be the rules so that people could feel safe and secure coming in. And to Phil's point, you know, there's just not good air circulation in the Capitol. It's an old building. People are jammed up in there. I know I've caught the worst flus I've ever had when I was a lobbyist at the Capitol, as have others. And so I think Clark is just wrong. He needs to get in line. This is just not a time for people to think that they're somehow special and different than everybody else. Just get the test, go to work, represent your constituents.
All right, everyone, we'll leave it there. Coming up, we have more details on how Republican lawmakers plan to tighten the rules around absentee voting. Stay tuned.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Many Georgia Republicans have vowed to change the rules when it comes to absentee voting in the state. A bill introduced in the state House this week would require voters who cast absentee ballots to provide copies of their photo ID when requesting an absentee ballot and returning one. Now, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this issue because it's a really important one. And Theron, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, this is a direct result of 2 things. One, a lot of Republicans right now are, you know, dealing with a lot of scrutiny from a lot of people who supported former President Donald Trump and saying that this election was fraudulent and it was stolen. And so, you know, this is something that I think is just very divisive. And I think that if Republicans want to start trying to win again, you can't change the rules because you lost. I mean, this is just a blatant attempt to decrease the amount of people who vote, but particularly Democrats Democrats and people of color because they lost a presidential race and they lost the 2 U.S. Senate races. And so I think that, many people have talked about this sort of rebranding that's going to happen with the Republican Party and trying to figure out what its life looked like after Donald Trump. But trying to suppress voting and suppress voters to vote in the legislature is not going to help the Republican Party diversify their party and hopefully try to start winning again.
Janelle, groups like Fair Fight agree with Theron and say that this amounts to voter suppression. I mean, what about folks who don't have access to computers or a copier? Is this placing an undue burden, and wouldn't it open the state up to even more lawsuits if it passes?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised that, Fair Fight and Stacey Abrams and all of them are pushing for this to remain the same, because they're the ones who benefited from it, because they were able to increase the absentee number of ballots that came in by utilizing the relaxed, rules and regulations that we had in place at this time. So I think it's only smart to look at this and ensure that election integrity is in place. And when you talk about people not being able to photocopy their ID, I mean, on average, we vote at the most 2, maybe 3 times a year. I mean, if you are an elderly person who does not have access to a computer, is not savvy, then I call on family members, neighbors, anyone with a kind heart to assist with this. This is just one extra step just to make sure that we are counting these ballots, that every legal vote is being counted, and then to eliminate anyone who has found loopholes in the current process. This is very normal, and as we see more increase in absentee ballots, we have to look at the rules. It's a normal process.
Kathy, if I have to present a photo ID when I vote in person, should I not have to do that when I cast an absentee ballot?
Well, the question is, what do you need to do to prove that you're the person, right? Right now, it's signature and signature match. We had signature matches up in Cobb County, and then a secondary audit by the GBI of 15,000 ballots, and they did not find any fraud in there, nor have we found cases of fraud to be sustained from complaints that have happened so far. So that's the first point, that the signature is serving as it, and then if it gets rejected, you have the opportunity to cure your ballot with an ID. But there are other things that other states have done, like letting people write the ID number in or the last 4 of their Social Security. The problem with the state here is that we don't have very good investment in technology, as evidenced by our recent budget. And so the security of those numbers is something that should be of concern to people. But I think we need to be really careful and make sure that people understand, to Theron's point, this is about the Republicans trying to change the rules because they didn't get their act together in time to get ballots out to people, whereas Democrats were on their game this year, and that's what happened. So, wasting time like that is really not efficient. And, to make, seniors or people who might not have access to technology have to, rely on the kindness of strangers or family members to come and help them vote is really a burden that just can't, that we just can't place on people.
Phil, let's talk about Kathy's point, because I'm old enough to remember when the initial voter ID law was passed, I think it was in 2006, there were a lot of questions from Democrats as to why Republicans were only requiring photo ID for in-person voting and not absentee. Republicans at the time said the problem was not with absentee votes. It appears they've changed their minds now after these recent losses.
You're making a good point. I remember that, and I was one conservative and Republican who said, wait a minute, there's a lot of fraud in absentee ballots in all 50 states, and the Republicans overlooked that. But I'm going to ignore the cheap partisan shots by Theron and Kathy. The problem is, if you're intellectually honest, you will realize that, and the pandemic was part of it, that the system was simply overwhelmed last year and on January 5th with regard to the absentee ballots. It just couldn't be handled. You didn't have good signature verification. And Kathy, I'm sorry, but even the Secretary of State's office said there were 8,000 ballots. And he said this under oath. Ryan Germany, the general counsel for the SOS, said they had to send letters that you voted illegally. And I hope there's some prosecution. So the Republicans or anybody, Democrats, would have to tighten up on this if there's evidence of fraud. And so it's a baby step that the legislature has taken. I hope they take some other steps to undo the ruling last March that Secretary of State Raffensperger signed off on, caved in to Stacey Abrams. And finally, there is no evidence of support suppression. I think that's the greatest myth that the left starts just publicizing. You can just see it from the numbers. More people are voting than ever.
Kathy, I'm sure you would say there's no evidence of fraud either.
There isn't, and let's just be real accurate about those 8,000, the complaint about 8,000 ballots. Those are people who needed to cure their ballots by making sure that they filled in appropriate information or signed in the right place or other things. So those are not 8,000 cases of fraud. And let's,
The
again,
curing process is not working.
And not
Lori,
partisan.
if I can,
Lori,
that curing process is a joke.
All right, Janelle and then Theron to finish it out.
Yeah, last thing, I just want to make a notion that this idea that we want to change, as Republicans want to change the rules because we lost, is, in my opinion, is the Democrats admitting that there was some form of an advantage on their side that's causing us to want to now adjust in order to create an advantage on our side. And that is the point of it all, is that there shouldn't be any advantages. We should make sure this process is just as tight as it could possibly be.
Theron?
Yeah, I think here's the problem. There was these baseless false claims that dead people were voting, that people were voting multiple times, and there was many investigations that came back and said that that was absolutely not true and false. And so the fact is that there's no evidence that we need to change the current system which is in place. And then lastly, Janelle, I've been working in politics in Georgia for a long time, and I remember how Republicans would beat us on election day or leading up to election day because you had Ralph Reed and the Christian Coalition who did a wonderful job of getting absentee ballots together, getting people to mail in their ballots. And so I agree with Kathy. We just did a better job this time around because we've had, 18 years to prepare for this moment than the Republican Party. And so I think, don't blame us for doing what we needed to do to win. You guys were totally in disarray. It was a circus throughout the entire election, and it cost you 2 U.S. Senate seats, and it cost you losing Georgia, which is now blue state.
Janelle, I'm out of time, but you got 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, we're not saying that you shouldn't do a good job as getting absentee ballots. I think both parties should do that, but you shouldn't have an issue with making sure that the process in which we bring in these absentee ballots are being handled in an integral way. That's all we're saying. So yeah, continue to do a good job, and I'm sure we're going to increase and do a better job going forward in 22 as well.
And I'm sure we'll be discussing this into 2022. Thanks, everyone. Coming up, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms gets a challenger for November. We'll discuss.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
It's official. Atlanta City Council President Felicia Moore announced she's running for mayor against incumbent Keisha Lance Bottoms. Kathy, you were Atlanta City Council President. You ran against Mayor Bottoms the first go around. Incumbents this time really do have the upper hand, but I just want to get your thoughts first.
Well, I think it's going to be a big race. I think the current mayor has got some work to do to make sure that voters are confident that she's getting the job done. And right now, I don't think that confidence exists. But I do think there are going to be a lot of people in the race. As has been noted many times, nobody who's been city council president has ever become mayor, although all of us have thought we would at one time or another. So we'll see if Felicia breaks out of that pack. But what's really going to be interesting is then this creates a vacancy at city council president, which will then cause other council members to run for city council president and will create city council vacancies. So it's on. Watch out. We're going to have a lot to talk about.
Yes, we are. Phil, let's talk about it. Felicia Moore's campaign will focus on the crime issue. Many folks all over the city are just fed up.
I think that people that are fed up with crime and the fact that murders doubled last year, shootings are way up, and aggravated assaults, they're cheering Felicia, and I think the police force should be cheering too, because there's been hemorrhaging of officers. It's understaffed. The morale is bad. They've been handcuffed. The mayor owns it from last summer during all of the massive rioting and looting and property damage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of businesses still ruined, by the way. way. And to your point, Lori, about incumbency, let's remember that in Fulton County, where obviously Atlanta is in Fulton County, they ousted their DAs in disgrace. Paul Howard was defeated. The sheriff was defeated because of the crime issue. And I'm glad Felicia Moore is emphasizing corruption and transparency, because it's been a disgrace starting in the Kasim Reed regime and then on into this mayoral regime. There's far too many people that have been indicted and convicted for corruption, and that's got to stop.
Theron, I know you're waiting to get in here. You and the mayor are very tight. What do you think? I would imagine that President Biden will be helping her in a lot of ways in her campaign.
Yeah, that definitely will happen. But listen, you know, Councilwoman Felicia Moore has served as a council aide. She was a member of the 9th District, represented the 9th District in the city of Atlanta for a long time, and has been a sort of, you know, lately very visible council president. So it was no really big surprise to any of us that I think she decided to run, and she's launched her campaign. I think we just have to really wait and see, you know, once people really examine her record. You know, we're still a long way from qualifying. Kathy knows this as well as anybody. It's the difference between announcing you're going to run and leading up to qualifying and having a strategy to really compete in a very, very tough race. But ultimately, I do agree with Kathy. I think you're going to see a few more people that kind of look at maybe jumping into the race. And we just have to really wait and see what the mayor is going to continue to do as far as, you know, whether she's going to launch her campaign. I think, but right now she's focusing on dealing with this public safety issue, and she's the one that right now has to own her portion of it and continue to lead.
All right, we'll continue to focus on it. Janelle, I want to switch gears because California Democrat Jimmy Gomez says he plans to introduce a resolution to expel Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from the House, citing her past support of social media posts calling for violence against Democrats, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I just think this is interesting. I feel like it's just a setup for 2022. And I honestly, you know, Democrats are still pretending that Antifa, you know, doesn't exist while Portland continues to burn and while they're looking at this. And in my opinion, I really don't want to take any advice from a party that has not held any of their people accountable to try to tell us what we need to do as far as holding our people accountable. At the end of the day, I really, really believe this is more of a political move. A lot of the posts that are coming up are old from years beforehand. And so we know that that's just a normal strategy in politics. But I think that Pelosi is just trying to make sure that she creates talking points around what's happening right now in the House, because in 22, you know, the House is definitely in jeopardy for being flipped into the Republican side. 30
seconds each, because Phil, I want to get your Republican perspective on this. I mean, should she be expelled, and is this a problem? Is she going to be a problem for Republicans going forward? Phil, and then Kathy, last word.
Well, we're talking about social media, and you know, you can be stupid on social media and extreme, but it's still protected speech. And I would point out that look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist from New York City. She just last week said Ted Cruz threatened to kill her. Now that's absurd. Now, if you want to tie two censure resolutions there, that's crazy language from AOC. And so I think that this is too politicized. I think maybe the rhetoric could be calmed down. I wouldn't argue with that.
Kathy?
She's absolutely incendiary. I don't think anything is going to happen to her, but she is not doing the job she needs to do for her constituents. I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't get to sit on committees. She's not going to be able to help get anything done because things are just not going to come her way. I hope people in the district are getting organized, whether a Democrat wins or a Republican wins. Let's get some adults in the room and, as Phil said, turn down the rhetoric.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, we'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Janelle, I'll start with you this week.
Okay, well, I definitely want to honor the life and legacy of Cicely Tyson, who recently passed. She was a legend and will be missed. And then I wanted to send my condolences to the Gainesville families who lost loved ones during the nitrogen leak that happened at the Foundation Food Group poultry plant. So I definitely want to send my heart and prayers to those families, and looking forward to see what comes out of that.
All right, Theron, over to you.
My first winner is going to be Norman Radow. This week, the Kennesaw State University named the Norman Radow Institute of Social Equity. So he's a dear friend and a big contributor to that university. Also, Juan Magruder, who's a graduate of Clark-Atlanta University, was named the Vice President of Advancement at Oglethorpe University. So I want to make him a winner. And also, Brookhaven City Councilman Joe Gebbia announced recently that he's going to retire and not seek re-election. So definitely want to thank him for his hard work and service in the city of Brookhaven. And then lastly, ran into Jules Joseph Stein. He's a big supporter of the show. Lori said he's been watching for over 30 years,
Aww.
and so definitely want to give him a big shout out today.
Thank you for watching. And Joe Gebbia used to be my city council person, so congratulations on that decision. Phil, over to you.
My loser is Mercer University and its law school dean, Kathy Cox, the former Secretary of State. They got into a big fuss this past week with prominent attorney Lynn Wood of Atlanta. And of course, Lynn Wood loves to tweet out a lot of controversial things. And he donated $1 million to their law school for a courtroom, and now they want to take his name off the courtroom, but they aren't doing it. And Lynn Wood says, look, if you don't like my social media tweets, just give me my $1 million back. Anyhow, the other loser is HB 120. That is a bill that would grant in-state tuition to illegal aliens for the university system and technical schools. That is so unfair, and it would be a magnet for more illegal immigrants. So loser.
All right, Kathy, I got about 30 seconds.
All right, well, my winners are the House Budget Committee. The additional money that they put into the Department of Public Health for 3 senior positions and new software was something we talked about last week. I hope they were watching and that prompted them. We should talk about legislation a little bit more. And also adding $15 million to the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. We need to get into this. There's a story behind that, but it's good that they did it. It's a smart move.
All right.
Losers, I got to say, David Clark, giant loser.
I think we might all agree on that one. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We will see you again next week.